11:59. That's pretty good timing. So we're on number 15 out of 52, almost at 4 months. Again, if you'd like access to part 2, it's patreon.com/snailshow. That's also in the description. I try to offer live every 4 or 5 shows, and most people have said yeah. So that's good. Please let me know if audio is okay. Hello? I can't hear you yet. Wait, hold on. I gotta turn my volume up. Can you hear me alright?
Yeah, I can hear you. I probably have to lean in more.
Oh, you're good. I turn the volume down and then I forget that I turned the volume down and then blame it on the guest, basically.
Sometimes I just put something on and kind of listen to it while I do something in the room.
Uh-huh.
And then I turn the volume down a little bit because it can be loud. I'm curious, what made you reach out to me?
I saw you doing a live stream on Facebook.
Oh, okay.
And, well, generally speaking, there aren't very many people who sort of have their wits about them still. So if I find somebody who appears to still have some cognizance of what's going on, then I'm attracted.
I discover so much more all the time. I mean, I just recently listened to something, a man in Arizona who has been really looking into what's been happening with resources in Arizona, that evidently they've been hoarding water.
Arizona has been hoarding water?
Yeah, well, the forces that be have been hoarding water and then telling everyone that they have to cut back on their water usage. There's plenty of water. But the real kicker I just heard was that the federal government will issue a grant to specifically, in this instance, have companies, come in and organize and do the work of, for example, clearing the forests. So they'll issue $24 million, to get the forest cleaned up. Then these LLCs are formed by these corporations, and they'll hire prisoners. They'll pay the prisoners $1.50 an hour, and the prisons $1 an hour, which probably gets to be maybe less than $1 million. And those LLCs walk away with $23 million.
How is it connected with the water being held back?
It's all about supply and demand. So then you create a scenario of lack, mm-hmm. and then you come in as a savior. It's the same thing again and again. So our career politicians really try to create commodities. And I've seen this pattern again and again in many things. I've seen it. There's a man that built the nuclear generation systems. And he would swim in the pool with the radioactive elements in it, and it would glow blue. And he said that, if you get, I think it's plutonium, if you have like a tablespoon in one hand and a tablespoon in the other hand, and you put it together, it's a small amount, you get a critical mass, and then you have like a sunburst explosion. So suddenly, when they were developing these nuclear power plants and he was building them, the government started making up this story that this was all toxic and poisonous. Mm. So what they were really doing is they were afraid that the masses would figure out, a small amount of plutonium can create an explosion, and that's a threat to the system. So what they also did was they called the waste product a toxic element, and they buried it in barrels to store it for future energy use. And they do use that depleted uranium to actually generate energy to run the submarines.
So are you saying that being irradiated, basically, or having trace amounts of plutonium around the human body. Are you saying that that's not actually dangerous?
No, no.
I've definitely heard of that theory before.
Yeah, I mean, so the point being, I mean, I live out on the East Coast, and they're really pushing these wind farms, and Biden just promised a certain amount of money to develop these wind farms out in the ocean. And the problem is, where the waters are shallower, that's naturally, there's more sunlight, so that's the big spawning ground, and these whales go there. And so the fishermen are all up in an uproar, and many people have stopped it. But what I've since found out, and I'm not sure about this, is that evidently they've discovered a body of fresh water under the salt water along the coasts. That's the biggest body of fresh water they've ever found off a coast of one of the continents. So, and then I was going in and looking at leasing, and one leasing article I found, it stated that if an entity has leased land for a resource, and for example, they happen to punch a hole in the ground and discover another resource, then they have the rights to that resource.
Huh. That's interesting, because I've heard of homeowners, essentially, you have a small plot of land, and I have heard that you have like the surface as far as your land, your rights concerning that land, and then the air above you and down below a certain depth is no longer yours. I don't know exactly how that works, but also, you're not allowed in some states to collect rainwater, which is absurd. I feel like most of it is absurd. Most of the sort of regulations surrounding ownership in general are absurd, and they have there are taxes associated with a lot of it, and assuming what happens to the thing you own after you pass away or something, you would think it would go to like a family member or something, but a lot of times it goes back into the pot. It's very interesting if you research into the idea of ownership and how that's regulated, because people spend their whole lives, purchasing a house with maybe a small plot of land, and even then it's not really technically theirs in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, we can go down many rabbit holes. I've read a lot, and I just found a great book that I think is very stabilizing. It's, maybe you've read it, written by Jeremy Locke, The End of All Evil.
I've not heard of it.
It's so simple, and he basically states that any kind of law is slavery, because in simplicity, if you live by principle, then you're very empowered, because in principle you understand how things work, which the human is built to be able to do. We're here on Earth.
Right.
It's a good book. I don't think you can buy it on Amazon. I went and looked. I wanted a hard copy. It's like $1,000. And that book and another book called The Language Crystal, you can't buy them in hard copy. You can if you want to spend a lot of money on them, but they're both available for free downloads online, I think.
Okay.
For the Jeremy Locke, Locke, The End of All Evil is, I may have paid something for it.
That whole books being super expensive, I've seen, I think, a couple times where the book is like $1,000 and then the Kindle version is $10 or something like that. I haven't seen that a lot, but I thought that was kind of fascinating. And I also wonder if the high price is just there because of the scarcity of the copies of the thing, or if it's there to discourage people from accessing certain information.
Yeah, that's such an interesting thing, and oftentimes when I run, because, that's how you compartmentalize, you narrow your focus so much that you're in a if this then that, you're in a dualistic thinking, so you can get caught up in something like, oh, do they do it because they don't want access, or is it because there's only a few copies? But it actually can be both,
or many others, right?
It's
always like a huge amount of, I've talked about this a little bit, the concept of how we make choices, essentially, and there's so much information regarding each choice that your actual choice making mechanism ends up being, we don't understand exactly where that comes from. We just kind of narrow the huge amount of possibilities down to a few, and then we pick probably one that feels the most comfortable, or statistically speaking, we think it has the highest likelihood of having some benefit for us, you know. But,
yeah, but the point is that a child can come up with 100 ways to use a clothespin, but by the time we're 7, we can't do that anymore. So we have this limited reasoning within a very set field of knowledge and information, which is how we learn to think, because we overuse the imagination as the very design of the public schools. So we end up with a reasoning that's a kind of rationing within very limited values.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we suppress our sentience, and then we have difficulty in making a decision, because on some level we want structure, but we sense, wait a minute, you know, it's like you're stagnant, you know, which one is it? And you have that emotional pressure from the classroom, because you're always answering to authority. You're not in discovery. You've got that pressure of, I've got to give the right answer.
Mm-hmm.
So this becomes suppressed, but it's this general underlying emotional tone that we kind of keep pushing away. So our whole processing ability becomes kind of like you're walking in super slow motion. Like, is it because they only printed so many of the books, or is it because, you know, it's something they don't want us to know? So you're walking in this kind of slow motion in a narrow focus.
Right.
So what you're talking about isn't necessarily bad, but we don't see how slow we're moving. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does make sense. I think just coming to the point to realize that our ability to hold many options in sort of an even balance, I think to even see that we have reduced ourselves like into a reductionist, just simple way of viewing the world, that's a big step for a lot of people. I don't think a lot of people have even really looked at that yet. And then when you come to that and you try to, well, let me exercise what I have seen. I've seen now that every single choice has, at the very minimum, a pretty broad spectrum of viable possibility. And then you have to, if you get to that point, then you have to be able to not be overwhelmed with sort of like informational overload, and still manage to function within this society that prefers you keep the boxes at, you know, like a 2 to 3 possibility range per choice or per whatever you're looking at. So you're kind of pushing yourself to the periphery or an outlier status simply by considering the possibility that every choice has lots of possible outcomes. Just by doing that, you're already making yourself into somewhat of a loner, and it's a difficult process. It's a difficult process to try to expand, but then yet also remain relatable with your fellows and your family and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, if one person's inner processing train is moving at one rate and another one is moving at another rate, it takes a lot of time to find a point of communication, mm-hmm. where you have to redefine your terms, and meanwhile you're kind of sluggish because you've actually suppressed your natural sentience. Like, children are born being able to learn things rapidly, and then slowly we get into this this reductionist thinking, which is, you're blindfolded and you're in the room with the elephant and you only see the trunk. Mm-hmm. You're so compartmentalized that it's really difficult to connect with the person that's seeing the tail. And that's when you've misused the imagination. So you've actually, children don't have a conscious, subconscious, and unconscious mind. They're open.
Right.
And then, because we acclimate in the first 7 years to that same thing happening in our parents, where they're suppressing things and their whole processing speed is slowed down, we acclimate to that, and by 7 we lose that natural learning ability.
Yeah.
And then we have likes and dislikes and a personality. So it's like we build our fractionalized, layered, resonant consciousness.
And we're encouraged to do so as well. And it's the fact that that's happening is very much hidden. It's not supposed to be really known because that's going to disturb how it's working. And it's interesting also that you're talking about how we get into the compartmentalized mode by age 7 or something like that, where the curiosity and things like that have been banished for the most part. It's the same model that the shadow governments, these secret groups, we kind of understand that that's how they operate in order to stay intact, because if they're doing things that would be deemed as dark and malicious by the public at large, then it has to be hidden within its own self. And that sort of model is filtered down, or it basically built this world or this society, and we have to live in this world in the way that it's presented. And the easiest way to live in the world the way that it's presented is to adapt that same reductionist view and compartmentalize, because then you don't have to examine the darker side of it, because you've separated yourself out from that. Like, some part of you knows there's something off here, but if you try to examine it with somebody, a friend or something, that block is going to come up, because they're like, well, yeah, that's over there, but I have these up and I'm comfortable, so don't make me go over there.
Yeah. I mean, it's this kind of, when I first really started looking at it, it's this weird twist of you're separated and fractionalized into limited, compartmentalized thinking, and that suppression is a busy work that you get resonantly caught up in, and it builds up around you, and then you're constantly validating that, and you forget what you did last year at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you're in your, it's like one of those moments when you see it, it's like you're in a new building, you lived in another house or apartment for 10 years, and you go and you live in a new place, and you go to turn on your faucet on your kitchen sink, and your body movement, which is automated, moves as though you were still in that old apartment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the subconscious remembers everything. Maybe not everything, but most of where you've been, but that it pushes you toward an automaton status rather than consciously remembering, I've been here before, so therefore I'm familiar with it and I can understand possible issues that could come up. Instead of that, it's just you automatically move through the motions because you've done it before. But I don't know that that's necessarily a healthy way of moving around. I mean, if we look at the last 2 years, almost 2 years now with this latest debacle, we've had something new coming up probably multiple times per month in terms of something that really needs to be examined, discussed, talked about, hashed out, regulated in many instances where it did not get regulated by whatever governing board. And there's been so many distractions coming along with every single revelation that, and the sort of silencing way.
It's the silencing. It's the silencing through taking something in a narrow field and complicating it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it's like a pollution of information.
Signal to noise ratio, right? It's a simple, like, is there a clear informational passage through which I'm navigating, or is that like almost obliterated by all the static? And that's how it is here and now, is it's mostly obliterated by all the static. So these important things that are popping up a couple times a month need to have been seen and discussed and adapted into our worldview. But that hasn't been happening. They've been sort of seen and discussed a little bit by the fringe, which is blocked and suppressed, and then it's on to the next thing, and everyone forgets about what happened 2 weeks ago, and it hasn't really been discussed properly. So it's like a double whammy in terms of us being able to sort of confront and analyze what's going on. It's been like a free fall snowball effect.
And it's interesting because humans have a natural ability to sense patterns. Mm-hmm. So it's almost as though they have to flow more static and chaos out to overwhelm your innate amazing ability to sense patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the same thing internally that happens with children, which is why at 7 or even at the age of 3 now, they lose that natural learning ability. So, I mean, how I got into this, how I started to see it was, I was a highly trained classical violinist, and my father was a journalist, so I did a lot of reading. I think in all the research I've done, because I really went into education, and I got a master's in reading K through 12, working with the children in the school and having worked with children in music, I noticed in the music, with the very structured training I had, if the child had the structure, they would start to like fly. It's this sense of fluidity and changeability and adaptability would happen within the child in playing the instrument. So, unfortunately, my husband died, and I couldn't really tour and, play in chamber orchestras, which is mostly what I did. The teaching was a little thing I did on the side. And I started reading about a lot of things because I was always a reader, and actually only 10% of the population reads after they graduate from college, which is part of the problem. So I go back to school because I have 2 young kids, and I'm working with all these children in an elementary school, and sometimes they're staring at me, and I'm like, hello? It took me a minute to realize I am giving this child new information and trying to bring a structure to them, but they've never had an opportunity to process many things. It's like they're moving at a really slow rate. Mm-hmm. And because of the way the school's set up, I had 40 minutes with them. And it's kind of like when you're working with a dog that's never had any kind of training, it's going to take 100 times. Mm-hmm. If a dog has had some training, relevant to their experiences, they might get something 10 times. But a dog that's had nothing is going to need so much time to process, it's going to take 100 times. So I just started asking all these questions, and I thought, well, wait a minute, I could process 1,000 notes per minute. Why didn't I ever do that with words? And that went down this rabbit hole of looking into all this research and reading, where they know that a human being by 21 should be able to process 1,000 words per minute, which is what the elite do, and they teach their children to read, like Elon Musk and Warren Buffett and these very successful people were already processing and reading language like that by the time they were 7. Warren Buffett started a company when he was 11. So the rest of us, we learn to read, basically your average teacher reads about 250 words per minute, or even 187 words per minute, which is not bad. If I have to read something that I've never read anything about, I'd slow way down. But I can't really generate a concept of the whole, like in music, unless I've really mastered the notes, the words. Right. So when I was in the school, starting to understand all this, and I was asking questions. Why are people losing their conceptual ability? Why are my friends that are 50 afraid to drive anymore? They can't even process the reality around them, and it's because of all this static and this fractionalized consciousness that's, enslaving us all and suppressing our natural amazing abilities as a human being. So I had the thought, well, how can I rebuild? Because I can't answer to all these Humpty Dumptys in the room. How do I rebuild so these children start self-discovering and self-generating like I'd seen with the structure in music? And that's when I got involved in TechnoTutor, and basically what it is, it's an accelerated learning tool. It's a focus builder and a word purifier, because when you absorb the language starting in the womb from your parents, you also absorbed all the emotional things, from the slow processing and the loss of your innocence or your natural learning ability. The child absorbs all of that. So how can you reintegrate the words, purify them, so that not this static isn't triggered and your natural processing ability and learning ability opens back up? And then I was talking online to a man called Bernard Pullman, and he's like, oh, this is it. And I was like, I'm an idiot, because the tool basically engages the 5 senses and gets you to get out of your resonance. So you rebuild the words and you speak, say, and write them. And what happens, like in 15 minutes, you can be sitting with a child working with this tool, and their posture changes. Just like when the structure was set with the violin, their posture changes if they've got any sullen behaviors or any of those subtle things and resistances and tensions that come up, where it's like they start pushing back against the world, or they embrace it and just completely become the proper character to do well in school and all that. They can go either way. Like if you can't beat them, you join them. Their posture improves, they start speaking the words, they start looking you in the eyes, they start getting A's in all their classes in school, because you're rebuilding that whole inner structure that focuses you, so that you start to be able to process your own, how you divided yourself and suppressed yourself, how it all works, so you are more able to deal with more complex forms instead of getting caught in that slow processing speed of, where you just you go into that compartmentalized, narrow field of information use. And when you start to get out of that, you open back up because you build self-trust and self-confidence. You can process the information in a smart way, efficiently, and then you have space to make more associations to what's going on around you, instead of being caught in that narrow focus where you have very limited associations because you're suppressing these emotional things that are actually shutting you down from your natural learning ability.
You said this was called Techno Tutor?
Techno Tutor, yeah.
Is it like a company, or are you associated with the founding of it, or you're just part of it?
Well, it went public in 2013. I already knew I was looking for something that I could rebuild the words with, and I knew it had to do with a focus, because in music, any kind of discipline does that, because the way we do one thing is the way we do everything. I mean, what's the media doing? It's, in a flash, throwing a bunch of information at you and you can't process it. Mm-hmm. Or you associate it to, all the things in the first 7 years. So if you can restructure yourself to process it all effectively, where the words have associations and meanings that are living ones, then you're going to open back up your natural learning ability. So when I was talking about this online, and the man that created it found me, and I actually never thought of selling it or being involved in it. I just wanted to see, oh my God, I know this is going to work. And I would go around and tell people about it, and they'd be like, oh, you're crazy. And I'm like, I know it's going to work. So I bought it for myself. And then I knew some parents because I was in the school, and I went and worked with some children. I was shocked. The parents, the schools were like, what is she doing? Because she's getting the kids to read. Wow. I was shocked. I mean, you see these children changing right in front of you, and you see that kind of lightness. It's funny, it's called enlightenment. But this lightness come back, and these sullen, behavioral problems just kind of fade and go away. And it's like, oh my God. So then I had no choice but to get involved in it.
How many children are you working with? This is an ongoing sort of a thing, right?
Yeah, it's an ongoing thing. There's a lot. It's set up so that there are distributors, because I can't possibly do it for everyone. Mm-hmm. And they're growing all across the country. If you go to lowercase techno/tutor.com, you can sign up to have a presentation, and someone will come and in many different ways explain what I've just explained, but as well work with your child and yourself and help you to start to rebuild, so that you focus on, following through with your goals, and working through some emotional behaviors that you have. And because it's a burden to really carry these things around, and we're unhappy because we're happy when we're focused and really doing.
Yeah, Yeah, it's the educational system, and this is what you said. This was the topic that you mentioned when I asked you about possible discussion topics, and it's a very important one, not just for the children, but for people in general, how they are receiving this mass informational outflow. Because I feel like if you don't have good tools to deal with lots of information coming at you, then you're gonna be herded essentially into the black versus white or two option scenario we talked about already, and we all already know about that. It's Democrat, Republican. It's race tensions, which are sort of irrelevant to how humans actually behave. It's a lot of just nonsense. It's a lot of noise, like what we talked about. It's noise. So,
and it always has a polarized nature to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's that you're with us or against us kind of thing, but we have a natural ability to see a complexity that is harmonious and resolve problems in relation to that. Right now, it's a good versus bad, right
Mm-hmm.
versus wrong, and that's the narrow focus. So you pick the lesser evil instead of picking what would be best for all.
Right.
Another way recently I looked at it was we have free will choice, but we're not free from the consequences of our choices. So if you can process more information more effectively and realize the distraction of right and wrong, good and bad, more than and less than, then you're able to come up with practical solutions that have no consequence. So everything remains in balance. You have to get out of that whole mindset.
Yeah. I usually come from the perspective that everything is balanced inherently. The universe itself is balanced, and if you push one thing one way, it's going to pop out on the other side. Maybe you can't see what happened, but it is there, and the sort of fear mongering that comes through the television acts like that's not the case. It acts like, climate change, we're about to go down to hell in a handbasket because gloom
and doom, it's all gloom and doom.
and even with that, it's still balanced. I know that it's still balanced. And if you can get people to realize, even in your worst case scenarios, even whatever this jabby thing is going to be, the effect it's going to have over the long term, whether it's our worst case scenario or not, it's still in balance. And just realizing that lets people sort of take a chill pill in terms of how they're internally feeling and apprehending this. And you can navigate better. You can navigate with a little lighter mind without, because it will be heavy if you allow it to. If you don't have tools to deal with what's being presented, and masks are coming back apparently, like on the 20th at least around here. So this thing is doing like a big ol', roller coaster.
It's an emotional roller coaster ride. Always keeping you in fear.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're mesmerizing or hypnotizing the masses through this constant undertone of fear and uncertainty.
Yeah.
And
if you've seen around it already, then you probably haven't been trembling, day to day because this thing is going to get me. It's more like, why are these people covering their faces up, and masks are dirty, and they're probably accumulating bacteria. People have been getting lung issues from just the mask alone. Like, the mask alone is causing lots of problems. And then that's not even to talk about the rest of it. But if you see it for what it is, you see, it's just like snake oil, and somebody is benefiting from the mass pushing of this particular Fauci oil.
And there's so much information out there. I do think what I've noticed where I'm living is that there are a lot more people walking in the woods again and walking along the shorelines and the parks, as though people, to some extent, are realizing, we need to get back out in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that, they're also thinking, we really need to think about what we eat. We need to care about our bodies, which would bring us all back into a place where we realize, this is all just a big show, and we really need to take care of the earth. So it may cause an opening to some extent, but at the same time, there are so many people, it's as though it's entertainment for them. We're so addicted to this abnormal state of fear that we just ride on the roller coaster because we like the highs and lows of it. It's like a drug, but you're never really happy. It's not a place of happiness. So one of the things that I thought about it, there was this one interview maybe about a year ago of a pharmacist, and she said, in 2018 and 2019, the number of flu deaths doubled. So, so many times products have been sold and they say there's no significant difference, but there is a tiny difference. And those tiny differences accumulate and they become a toxic environment. So in some ways, and other people have said this, I believe Finland has just decided that they're not going to play the COVID game anymore. And they've said, you've weaponized the common cold. Mm-hmm. I mean, what a perfect invisible enemy when you don't admit through all those years, especially from World War II and beyond, that all those no significant differences have bioaccumulated into the environment to the point where the flu is more extreme. Our body, and a flu is actually a detoxifying event. So that event is becoming more extreme because of what we've allowed in our environment through the deception of, there's no real difference here.
Yeah, I feel like that's how most of it is. I feel like we've had so many new elements introduced since the technology started doubling faster and faster. We've had so many additions to the environment that we don't know the results of. We don't know the results of being around a cell phone almost the entire day. We don't know the effects of most of what has been sort of presented as, we just discovered this new thing. We just discovered high-speed rail. We just discovered whatever. There's so many new things coming out that I feel like we are going to have a big just bang moment to some extent, because we're acting as a society like all of these things that have been implemented don't have lots of effects, but they clearly do, because look out the window. The C thing is worldwide. It's like a worldwide psyop, and it's essentially the machine announcing, we've been sort of in control this entire time, but we're just now letting everybody know this is how it's going to go, and then it just forces you to stand on one side of the line or the other, and it's a big shit show.
It's difficult too, because the legal system, the way I see it, and I may be wrong, maybe there are clever lawyers out there that can build a defense, but the legal system is such that you have to prove that this one thing is the cause of whatever's happened to your body or the environment, but it's the accumulation of a million slashes, so to speak, that has caused the imbalance. So it's like everywhere you turn, this storm, of good and evil on the valley of Earth is just there screaming. And that's why I believe that education is the most important thing. Because, I'm going to be 60 this year. So I'm like, I spent my life just partly in survival mode, but I also happen to continue to read and notice patterns, and not very many people do that. There are many great people that do that and probably do it better than I do. But the point is that if our children really if they master the language, and they're like an Elon Musk or a Warren Buffett, they get that real potential, so that at 21, they're processing 1,000 words per minute. Mm-hmm. And they can really see, the complexity of harmonious things and understand the pressures and the tensions and the suppressions that are withholding that, like you're beginning to discover yourself. If you could process information more effectively at a much younger age, then we'd have a strong group of people coming up who would recognize this and be able to come together and really do something about it. Because the power is actually in the numbers and not in some superhero, icon that everybody follows.
Yeah. Yeah, the hero thing is a bit overplayed, I think. I think it really is. It's like you're saying it's that the individual which makes up the group, it is the individual. Like, sure that you have sort of like mass hypnosis and things where an entity can try to control behavior of a large group of people, but that's not even healthy. That's not... Diversity is literally what the biosphere itself is made of. It's made of diverse elements which have achieved symbiosis and harmony with each other. And sometimes through discord and, eating each other or what have you, like that element does exist, but for the individual to understand, like Alan Watts has said, discord on one level is harmony on another level, perhaps a higher level that you can't see. So to understand that even in this situation where it all appears insane, even this insanity is harmonious on some higher level, and we don't need to sort of give in to, because it's your free will. Like, if you want to, to me this is a big harvesting operation on all levels, like top to bottom. Whether you're the king or whether you're the pauper, it's an energy harvesting scheme, and we don't even necessarily know who's using the energy. We just understand that it's like some sort of a farm, but it's not like necessarily a intentionally malicious farm. Like, if you go look at a farm where cows are being milked, like, the farmer doesn't hate the cow is providing some benefit to him. So, like, if you can look at even if it feels bad, if you can look at it in a neutral standpoint as you can, then you can understand, I have room to maneuver within even this bad system, which looks like a bad system to me, rather than being stifled and stymied and going into the reductionist mindset, and you feel like you have no options. And you don't have to do that on the individual level. You can play within, even if you're stuck in an actual prison, like, you can learn to play and understand the situation.
Yeah, I think to some extent, though, the idea that the discord causes harm, and I think one of the key elements into using your free will correctly is to realize that you consider all things and you do no harm. You take the good, you consider all things and you do no harm. And I always think of the Ringing Cedars of Russia, where she describes a world where there is that symbiotic, synergistic relationship where it's more transformative. So you're playing with the complex and the harmony of it, and instead of having harm, you have transformation. But right now, this whole mindset that's normalized is really a transformation.
Yeah.
So we're all literally walking in these resonant bubbles, and people even talk about the cone in front of your eyes. So we have to rebuild and come back down to earth, which we've been told millions of times, and consider all things and be present here, instead of, that duality of, living in the past and projecting the past into the future. Mm-hmm. And that's what will open up that natural learning ability, that innocence, which will feel lighter. So you will be in enlightenment. You won't be carrying those heavy fear, emotional things around with you. So that's the whole point of Technotutor, is to rebuild that, to open up your natural sentience, so that you start processing information so effectively that you become a transformer instead of a transformation.
That's a pretty good one. That's a nice double entendre.
Yeah, there's another word that I learned a couple weeks ago, because, there's these kind of cultural terms for things, and then there are scientific terms for them. And one of them is the sins of the father. It's actually known as autogenesis.
Autogenesis.
So, your parents absorbed the trauma of their parents, and it got us caught in this compartmentalized, layered, shattered consciousness, mind consciousness, and then that's passed on from one generation to the next. So that's autogenesis, because you become what you practice. Like in the business model, they say, you are the words you become what you practice. Your thoughts, your words become your thoughts, become your habits, become how you direct yourself in your life.
So how would the vicious cycle, right? That the same thing is repeated even with domestic abuse, and people seem to attract the same situations until they've resolved whatever is acting as a hook or a weight. So it's hard to break that pattern. That's not an easy pattern to break, even the autogenesis thing.
Well, you begin to see that you're caught in a negative feedback loop. Mm-hmm. You're caught in a timeline of thinking, and it's polarized. So often, with the relationship abuse situations, you're in that duality, that polarity where, the man beats you up or the woman beats up the man, because it can be both ways. And then you feel superior to the person that beat you up. Mm. You actually define yourself as having some value because, and it's like a little storm in a teacup, but, it's so hyper inflamed that you're defining yourself as that. And another weird one, which I've actually seen in the schools, and it always shocks me every time, is when a parent, for example, will have a special needs child, and when the child's at home, they do nothing. Absolutely nothing. They just put them in front of the television. They say, I can't cope with this. But then the child goes to school, and I've had aides tell me this, and the parents want to know what the child's doing all the time, and the aides send pictures. And one time an aide told me that she sent a picture to the parents of their child sitting at a table in the lunchroom eating lunch. And the response of the parents was, well, how did you get him to sit at the table? But then if something happens to the child, like say they trip, maybe kids are running and the special needs child has some anxiety because their programming from Autogenesis is just haywire. They fall down and maybe they, bang their elbow. The parents will call the school, make a big, huge drama, like, how could you allow that? How could you allow, and that's them having a moment of caring for the child. Mm-hmm. So they feel like, I'm doing a good job. But in reality, they do nothing.
Yeah, as contrast to what happens every single day at home, right?
Right. So you can see how this compartmentalized, very limited reasoning shows that a human being does want to have purpose, even if it's been funneled down into these absurd situations where they take no real responsibility. Mm-hmm. And they use dramatic situations to validate themselves. But it's like they're running on a treadmill.
Yeah.
So, and every time they hear a word, it triggers all of this personality suit. So one of the things is, really rebuilding the words, purifying the words and rebuilding them just by doing it a little bit every day. And you get a certain momentum, that critical momentum going, and you start seeing your own constructs. And it's very enlightening. It's like, wow, So, and we're taught to believe that, oh no, I can't possibly see outside of this box. But yes, you can. Or prevention being the best cure for our children is to really make sure they have the vocabulary, because in all the research in the vocabulary, the more words you effectively know, because you can have, you can know quite a few words in a narrow focus, but you can't see outside of it. But the more words you effectively know, the longer you live, the longer your relationships last, and the more money you make.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Statistically speaking?
Yeah. There's something, people can actually go and look it up. There's something called the Johnson O'Connor Institute, and he started doing studies on this in the 1920s. So it's very, very known. So you put a child into a public school design where they're following authority, they have this anxiety to always give the right answers in the narrow field, and they suppress their natural sentience, and they've got that perpetual current of fear, and they're going to lose all their critical and creative thinking ability.
Yep.
And I believe it was said by John Taylor Gatto that he went and looked into the history of it, and I live in Barnstable County in Massachusetts. But in the 1850s, they started the public school system. I don't know that they had high school then. And the parents of Barnstable County said no. So in the 1880s, the militia came in and forced the children in Barnstable County into the public schools. And the parents were screaming. They said, if you put these children in a box to take in information through their imagination only, they're going to lose all their critical and creative thinking skills. So what is autism but an autogenesis of having shut down our natural critical and creative thinking skills?
Yeah.
So it's through education, how we build ourselves, how we frame ourselves. We need those tools to structure us, to be able to process, all the chaos that's around us, and also know who we are and what we like. And it's fascinating on another level too, because accelerated learning is engagement of the five senses. So even if you're a painter, or let's say you're a musician, or let's say, this idea in the schools, as they've compartmentalized things to try to deal with the chaos, they say you're a kinesthetic learner, or an auditory learner, or a visual learner. Well, words are visual, kinesthetic, and auditory. So if you have these structural tools in you, where you really know the words so well, you don't have to think about them, you're going to be able to conceptually process, the limitation of the box, but also the world around you. And then you're going to be able to perform much better. So, if you're always following authority, it's interesting in the Jeremy Locke book, he says that law is following authority, and that's slavery. But when you use principle, where you really understand things, like you understand, I think he uses the example of interplay between a gas and a liquid creates a cold zone, and that's how a refrigerator works. So that's very empowering. Like, oh, I know that. That you feel good. You feel the lightness.
Yeah.
But if you're, having to answer to an authority and give the right answer, there's a heaviness.
Yeah.
And you've only got two choices. You're going to be weighed down by the confusion and the limitation of it.
Right. It's completely turned on its head. It's like it's the Pavlov dog experiment just carried out en masse, because my understanding is that there isn't really a right answer in any situation. There's like the more likely answer that happens in most of the cases, and you can get sort of a probability threshold or something, but to say this is the truth, that's why I think fact checkers are so ridiculous, because it's taking a multi-dimensional world, which is represented by every single idea that you could put in words, and it's narrowing it down to A versus B, and even implying that could be a thing, and it just makes it ridiculous. It makes the person who's looking at the fact check, they're now considering this thing is true or this thing is false. And regardless of whether the fact check is lying and going to the opposite direction of what we tend to feel is actually happening, regardless if that's happening, it's still doing the compartmentalizing to an extreme fashion. Instead of having maybe 3, 4, 5 choices, possibilities, you now have 2, like good or bad. It's like the dumbest thing ever.
Yeah, that's the duality, the narrow focus, and that's how you fractionalize yourself because you have to suppress your own awareness. Yeah, so it's like an inverse scenario. It's It's kind of crazy. So yeah, I mean, you use accelerated learning techniques and you reintegrate the words and you get yourself structured so that your processing speeds can recognize all these patterns and you can see beyond your own duality, your own dualistic thinking.
Is this program like monetarily accessible for people, or is it really expensive?
Actually, we call it a tool and we make it affordable for everyone.
Okay.
And there's a lot of support in it. Like if any of your callers were interested in looking at it, and a distributor came in and worked with them on it, they can always call me too for support.
Yeah, I'll look into it for sure. I'll see. Maybe we can talk a little bit more afterward.
Yeah, cool.
I've taught a little bit. I used to tutor chess in the younger grades, like
oh, that's awesome.
2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, kind of like that, and I saw the same sort of, like, I'm not that way. I'm not like black versus white, yada yada. Like I like the comprehensive array of every moment, and it's infinite to me. So you can't really grasp it, so to speak. But I see when I try to teach the kids chess, I see that they're expecting me to give a question that has, a right answer, and then they're going to give the right answer, and I try to like maneuver around that expectation and have them. It's like you're trying to get a spark in each kid that is just the question, the curiosity spark. That's what we're trying to rekindle in them, I think.
Right, exactly. Yeah, chess is awesome for that. I did a lot of chess with my kids, and it was one of probably the straws on my own camel's back in relation to that, where I started seeing the learning ability of the children and how fast it was and how they loved recognizing patterns and being able to express and move and rearranging puzzles and all those things. I mean, it's intrinsic in human nature to be able to do that. And chess is an awesome, awesome thing to wake that up in children. That's really awesome that you did that.
Yeah, I've been fascinated by that game for a really long time, and I'm going for one of the lower hanging master titles that you're able to earn, which I should hopefully be able to get within the next few years. But
yeah, it was cool in the town I was in when my children were I think my younger son was 2 and my older son was 4. Really strong chess club group, and we went to tournaments and all this stuff, and it took about 6 to 8 months, and they beat me. That was it.
Yeah.
But the group was so strong, and the guy made it a lot of fun, and my kids really got good at chess. It was awesome.
Yeah, it really does mimic life itself in the way that you attempt to understand it, because I wouldn't say that the game itself is infinite, but it's very close to, as far as our minds can comprehend, as far as the possibilities.
It is. It's like, when you first learn an algebra problem, and the first few times, you look at it, it's like, what is this? And then pretty soon you recognize how it works, the inner movements of the formula. Mm-hmm. And you can look at the formula and say, the answer like that. I mean, that's very empowering. And so chess has all these patterns to it, and it is a complex but harmonious thing. And when you know how that all moves, and you can interact with that with another person, and you open up, recognizing more complex patterns, that's really, really empowering. So really knowing your language to the point where you don't have to think about it and you realize you can learn anything is really the same thing. And what I can see how putting a child in a box would just to stay in a narrow focus with a limited set body of information that you memorize only and you never have living application about, of, or as, that shuts down that desire to understand patterns, to understand interactions and relationships and associations, and make it a living thing that you can apply. I mean, we're just great. Humans are great, but we're really suppressed.
Yeah, we're coming to the end of this first one, but I wanted to make one last chess analogy.
Yeah, I saw you looking around. I was like, oh, we're at the end.
we're a little bit over, but you've been great, so it's totally fine.
That was awesome. Thank you. I'm really glad we chatted.
Yeah, well, there is a part 2, so don't hang up don't put your coat on quite yet. But we have one more section after this. If you're okay with that, you're okay time wise.
Sure.
Okay. I just wanted to say, on chess, on learning that game, you can do it both ways, and some people do. You can learn, for instance, openings, and you can learn moves and best responses to the moves up to 15, 20 moves in if you want to. But
right.
if you're using the model that says learn this thing just because, like learn these moves just because, memorize them,
right,
you'll get yourself into a position, 15 moves in where you've done all the book moves, but because you just learned to regurgitate it, you won't know what to do when you reach the end of the book.
Exactly. Because you don't really understand, I guess the simplest way to say it right now is the inner harmony of it all.
Yeah, well, you don't understand why you did those moves. There's a very specific, explainable via concepts reason, and if you try to explain all of the reasons for why a book, chess theory in a certain opening to move 15 happened the way it did, it would take millions of books just to explain one opening. But you can start seeing the general principles of why pieces are moved in the way that they're moved in general terms, and then that will help you understand a little bit. And that's like the beauty of the game of chess is you start grasping. It's like learning a language. You start grasping the language of the piece movement, and you're just not regurgitating it because it doesn't. It's just a bad way to learn. Like, yeah, I can memorize things, but if I don't know why, then there's no point. And if I'm doing it to get a pat on the head, there's also, it's to me it's
That's
a bad way.
It's like paint the fence. Really know the ordinary so well that you don't have to think about it. So then when it gets more complex, it's simple for you to just process through the ordinary, because you really know it, and it's not a huge memorized textbook.
Right.
Because that's going to slow down your processing ability ultimately.
Right. This is good. We have one person commented. I don't know. I guess it's a lady. She said, "I really needed to hear this. Thank you, Gary and Rebecca." And then she also said, "I'm around 2 boys under 7, nearly 7 days a week. So I'm sure that your program would be great for somebody in that situation."
It would be awesome. You just need to do it a little bit every day. You can do it more, but also you as a parent can do it and reintegrate your words, and then you'll start to, what will happen is some of your emotional reactions won't be as big, and you'll follow through in more practical, calm, self-directive ways. And that'll just open up your whole home life and improve all the communication, because a lot of our problems are we don't have the words to explain how we feel, or, this chaos that's going on. So if you build your vocabulary, you're more able to call things out by name. I mean, there's a fairy tale, Rumpelstiltskin, that's, he doesn't take, the princess's child because she figured out his name. There's great power in being able to call things out by name, because then they no longer have power over you.
Yeah, it's very true. If we could have a break, just a 10-15 minute break, that would be great. And if you're short on time or something, I normally do 2 45-minute segments, but we went like an hour on the first one, so if you only want to do half an hour on the second one or something like that, that's completely fine. It's up to you.
All right, we can keep going. That's fine. I'll let you know when I'm like, okay.
Well, there are separate segments. I have one patrons only. The second half is patrons only, so I have to restart it anyway.
Yeah, okay.
But we can make it a shorter break, maybe like a 5-minute break. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. I'll send you a message when we're getting going again.
All right, so what? Do you send me another link, or do I just shut down now?
I send you another Zoom link.
Okay, all right, cool. All right, I'll look for it in my email.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Gary.
Patreon.com/snailshow. to get the second part. That should be uploaded later on tonight. So thank you everybody for hanging out.